Daniel stood at the edge of a rain-slicked alleyway, watching the neon signs flicker against the puddles like dying stars. He flicked a cigarette butt into the gutter, watching it disappear into the dark water. At 15, he had already made a trade that would haunt him for decades. He swapped his school books for a bottle, masking his growing uncertainty with the burn of cheap alcohol. By 16, lies had become his primary language, a complex shield built to deflect his mother's pleading eyes. He remembered the heat of his own anger when she reached for him. He pushed her hand away, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the door frame. The heavy wooden door slammed with a finality that shook the house, the vibration echoing through the empty hallway. He walked away into the night, convinced that his isolation was not a weakness, but a form of absolute strength. He was alone, and he believed he was invincible. By the time he turned 20, Daniel had mastered the art of burning bridges. It was a craft he practiced with a strange, dark pride. He gambled away his rent money on a whim, laughing as the phone stopped ringing and his friends finally stopped calling. He watched his girlfriend pack her bags in a silence so thick it felt like smoke. She stood at the threshold of the apartment, her eyes no longer angry, just cold and distant. She looked at him and said, "You only love people when you need something." Daniel didn't even look up from his glass. He just stared at the amber liquid and replied, "Then leave." The door closed softly this time, but the silence that followed felt heavy, like lead pressing down on his chest. He poured another drink, celebrating a freedom that felt increasingly like a prison. He was the king of a hollow kingdom, watching the world move on without him while he sat in the dark. At 35, the world had shrunk to the size of a dark, cluttered apartment. He sat surrounded by empty bottles and the dust of a life he had systematically dismantled. No one called. No one waited for him to come home. He stared into a cracked mirror in the bathroom, his reflection blurred by years of fatigue and regret. The man looking back was a stranger. Suddenly, the weight of every bridge burned, and every lie told came crashing down. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking as the silence of the room finally broke into jagged, rhythmic sobs. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was the sound of a man shattering. The next morning, the sun cut through the grime of his window, illuminating the wreckage. Something shifted. Daniel stood up, his legs weak, but his mind clear for the first time in years. He gathered the bottles, his hands trembling with withdrawal and fear, and dumped them into a black trash bag. Each clink of glass felt like a step away from the grave. He walked to the community center, his boots feeling heavy on the pavement. He sat across from a counselor, the air between them smelling of stale coffee and hope. His voice cracked as he spoke his first honest words in decades. "I know I cannot change the past," he whispered, "but I want to become better than the man I was." The process was agonizingly slow. He spent months sweeping dusty floors and answering phones, enduring the crushing weight of old regrets that surfaced every time he was alone. He finally visited his mother. They sat on her porch in a long, profound silence, staring at the horizon together. The air was thick with years of unspoken apologies and the scent of damp earth. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just stayed. He began to mentor teenagers who hung around the same corners he once did. He pulled them aside when he saw that same reckless, self-destructive spark in their eyes. He told them his story, not as a warning, but as a map out of the dark. Years later, Daniel walked through the local park. His gait was no longer the hurried stumble of a man running from himself, but steady and calm. He stopped to help a stranger lift a heavy box, his hands strong and reliable. He was not a hero, and he didn't seek to be one. He was simply present. He had stopped running from the ghosts of his 20-year-old self. He looked at the trees and the families playing on the grass, feeling a quiet connection to a world he had once rejected. As the sun began to dip below the jagged city skyline, casting long, golden fingers across the path, he stopped. He turned his face toward the warm light, feeling the breeze against his skin. The shadows behind him were long, but he no longer feared them. The ashes of who he used to be remained in those shadows, but he was walking toward the dawn of a different life. He breathed in the cool evening air, knowing that while the past was written in stone, the future was a series of small, honest choices. He was finally home, within himself.